I'm going to read the statement that came out yesterday from the Minister of Sport, the Honourable Chris Bishop. Sport and Recreation Minister Chris Bishop has asked Sport New Zealand to review and update its guiding principles for the inclusion of transgender people in community sport. The guiding principles published in 2022 were intended to be a helpful guide for sporting bodies grappling with a tricky issue. It's not a tricky issue, Chris Bishop, only if you're a wokester. They are intended, these guidelines, to be voluntary, not mandatory. Well, in the age of cancel culture, they become mandatory. Earlier this year, I undertook to keep a watching brief over this genuinely difficult issue. No, it's not. It's quite straightforward. As part of that watching brief, I've met with a range of individuals and groups and have sought advice from Sport New Zealand. The National New Zealand First Coalition Agreement commits the government to ensuring publicly funded sporting bodies support fair competition that is not compromised by rules relating to gender. Oh, but you just told us they weren't rules, that they were just voluntary suggestion-y things. Anyway, it is important that transgender people feel able to participate in community sport, but there are obviously difficult issues for sporting bodies to grapple with around fairness and safety as a result of that participation. I have come to the view that the guiding principles do not reflect legitimate community expectations, that sport at a community level should not just be focused on diversity, inclusion and equity, but also prioritise fairness and safety. Earlier this week, I wrote to Sport New Zealand Chief Executive Raylene Castles to ask her to review and update the guiding principles accordingly. I expect to receive an update from Sport New Zealand in the coming months. We don't know how many of the coming months. Well, I'm just going to speak to that let me not speak to that. I'll come back. But there is what Chris Bishop said yesterday. And that is a change. And at least it is recognition that National, as a party, and Chris Bishop as a minister have actually done something, only because I understand massive pressure applied by New Zealand First, who themselves were reacting to pressure created by groups like Save Women's Sport Australasia. And one of the people who'd been applying that pressure and has appeared a lot on this issue on the platform was Ro Edge. And Ro, I know you've pulled over to the side of the road. Thank you for joining us this morning at relatively short notice.
My pleasure. Oh, it's a great result finally, isn't it? I mean, we're not quite there yet, but at least Minister Bishop has recognised that the advice that he received from his officials was incorrect. You know, and we saw that when we met with him last month. It was clear that he thought that fairness and safety, that there were exemptions for that for females in those Sport New Zealand guidelines. But when we pointed out to him that the only time fairness and safety was mentioned was in regards to transgender people, and the only time that females were mentioned was in regards to disciplining them should they raise fairness and safety concerns, I think the penny dropped.
So you do think he's had a genuine change of heart? Because that read to me like a very reluctant and soft press release. I mean, what's the timeline? The coming months.
Yeah, no, I honestly do think he had a change of heart. You know, the other interesting thing when we were in that meeting is we started presenting some of the impacts, and his immediate response was, these are going to be from overseas. There's no impacts here. And we're like, Minister, no, all of these are from New Zealand, and they're just the tip of the iceberg. And then when you understand that the reason that you don't hear women speaking up is because of the disciplining that goes on and, you know, the labelling as being transphobes and bigots, you know, I do honestly believe that it opened his eyes, and this has helped make him bring around about this change of decision.
Yeah. And let me make it clear, Ro, in all conversations I've had with you, this is not about getting down on people who have issues with gender identity. It's not about saying you can't play sport or you shouldn't be allowed to play sport. It's figuring out a way that everyone can play sport in a way that's safe for everyone.
Exactly. And now the big challenge that Sport New Zealand have is because they're so captured by transgender ideology, is that if they want to enable inclusion but prioritise fairness and safety, there is no way that they can allow people to self-identify into the category of their choice, because the two are incompatible. If you include male bodies in female sport, you exclude females either because of fairness, safety, or just they do not want to play. And so, I don't know how they're going to manage this in a few months, but in reality, the only way that they can ensure inclusion, fairness and safety is for people to play in the category of their biological sex, and then it works for everyone.
Yeah. Look, I'm not sure. Once again, I'm just going to question your belief that the Honourable Chris Bishop has had a come-to-Jesus moment. I'll just read again from his release. It's important that transgender people feel able to participate in community sport, but there are obviously difficult issues for sporting bodies to grapple with around fairness and safety, right? He says the guiding principles should not just be focused on diversity, inclusion and equity, but also, now he says, prioritise fairness and safety. To your reading, does that mean fairness and safety comes ahead of diversity, inclusion and equity?
Yeah, definitely. That's the priority. I think that's pretty clear in there.
Yeah. When we got into this, I'll tell you, Ro, when we got into this, I got a lot of blowback from political staffers at Parliament when I pointed out that I thought the current policy was completely, and you told us about it, at odds with the coalition agreement. Winston Peters came out swinging, and then suddenly I was being told I was a starer and I'd misheard Mr. Peters. It seemed to me they were trying to sort this out without it being a big dispute between National and New Zealand First. But I'd have to say, despite that, I think New Zealand First's political commitment to, the issues that you've raised probably is what got this movement.
Yep, I agree, and we are so grateful to them. I'm actually speaking at the New Zealand First Convention on Sunday, and I'm happy to do so because they are the only party who has had the courage to speak up against this gender ideology madness that is actually undermining women's rights across the board.